Hey guys, what's up? Alex B here, and I decided to show my face on my YouTube channel. And today I'm gonna do a track breakdown for Welcome Home. This is a very special track to me because it was #1 staff pick on Motion Array for the month of January. It gave me a payout of over $3,000. That was unbelievable. Without further ado, let's check it out. Let's see what's under the hood here. Let's start by listening to the track. Okay, first of all, I'm gonna talk a little bit about my creative process for this track. And I wrote this track for one of the Production Music Academy's monthly challenges. It was the December of 2022 challenge. The challenge was actually to write a track that would symbolize somehow the mood and feel we wanted to have for 2023. And I wanted to have a very upbeat, a very happy feeling for 2023. And it actually ended up being my best seller on Motion Array. And I was just so happy about it. So what happened here is that I used a reference track that I wrote myself. So this is my reference track. I'm just turning off all the mastering chain here because it's already a mastered track. But it's called Nice to Be in Orbit. And this particular track used to be my best seller on Motion Array before I made Welcome Home. So let's take a quick listen to it so you can get the vibe. It's another hip-hop track. And I have some guitars going on. There's another guitar coming in right after that. Spoken word again. Synth. And the brass stabs. So what I did was pick up the basic elements of that track called Nice to Be in Orbit, and put them all back into another track and do a whole mix and match and come up with a different track using the same basic elements of my reference. And this is a process I usually do. I had to learn how to work with reference tracks in order to be more productive and in order to actually feel that my tracks were evolving in quality. And because if we don't work with good reference tracks, it's really hard to know where you're supposed to go. So if you have a clear orientation of where you want to go, that's what a reference track is for. It's much easier to get the job done and to end up with a good licensable track. So let's see what's going on here. And what I have here in this track is lots of different track stacks where I put the drums. They are all summing stacks. I have them all here going into one channel, and I'm doing some processing, especially on that group channel. So I'm doing this basically for each and every instrument groups here. What I have here is the drums channel, percussion, bass guitars that are playing more harmonic parts, and melody guitars, the guitars playing the melody. There is this one chime chord layers, which is basically a synth layer, just playing the basic chord progression of the track. Then I have another bus here for the brass. All the brass is coming into this one. There's some heavy processing going on here, and another one for the bass. And here I have the crashes and chimes, and there's another ear candy channel here, and the spoken word element of the track is right here. It's a Columbia Welcome Home recording, so this is why the track is called Welcome Home, actually, because there's a guy saying welcome home here. Listen to that. So this is where the title of the track came from. And down here, I have some auxiliary channels for the reverbs I'm using. So I have 4 of them. This one is panned to the left, the other one panned to the right. And the others are a large hall and a small room, and they are all in the center. Since I'm talking about reverbs here, it's interesting to show already that I am cutting some of the low end of those reverbs. So this is a good trick to avoid having a muddy mix, because you just cut off all the unnecessary low end that you're gonna have building up in that region. So I did this for these 2 reverbs here, and this other one is barely being used, and I forgot to do the same thing here, but I didn't feel that it needed it because it's just on a few elements. So there's nothing to worry about here. It's barely being used. So let's explore the session here. Let's start with the drums. Let me just expand the drums, the drum channels here, so we can see what's going on. So this is the first part. So this is just a Logic drum loop. It's a MIDI loop, and I'm using one of Logic's drum kits. Just stock stuff. I'm a heavy Logic stock sounds user. I use a lot of Logic's stock plugins as well, and I think they just work great for the kind of music I write. And there's something I'm doing here, which is using Soft Tube's dirty tape to get rid of some of the high end here and make it sound a little bit more vintage or something like that. So this is what's going on here, and I keep that same pattern here, but without that effect, that high-end cutting effect. And I introduce a different beat, which is actually the most important beat here in the track, the main beat. It's an audio loop from Logic. So as we can see here, there's some chopping up going on. So every time I use samples and or any kind of loops or anything, I try to chop them up and change them just enough so they sound like they're my own thing. This will help avoid content ID problems for the clients of the libraries I work with, and this is the best thing to do. I learned this from Stephen Battle, and it's a very useful thing to do. And here I'm layering the drums with the same pattern, the MIDI pattern I had before, but now I have all the high end here. It sounds very artificial on its own, but when you put them together, they sound actually good. I did it because the audio loop doesn't really have that high-end energy that I think that an upbeat track needs. I think they work in a complementary way because I have the high energy here in the MIDI drums, and I have the vintage energy and drive in the audio loop. So this is how they sound together. Okay, there's something cool going on here I almost forgot to mention, which is this element, this tape stop element here. So Logic, courtesy of Logic, we have this great feature, which is the slow down feature here. What we do is you click and drag from the upper corner here, and you have two options: fade in or speed up if you are on the left side of the audio region, and if you're on the right corner, if it's the end of the audio region, you have the option to fade or slow down. So now in this case here, I'm using the slow down feature, and I use it a lot in lots of contexts, especially for hip hop. Sounds pretty decent, and it doesn't need any special plugin to do it. So these are my drums. I just go over and over with those drums and take them away here for a breakdown, and I chop them off here for another breakdown, but it's pretty much all I have for drums. And you must be asking yourself, why do you keep those muted channels over there? So this is my side chain kick. So I have a kick sound here, and what it's doing is just sending the signal to the compressors I have on other channels. So it knows when to activate the compressor based on the kick. And it's a simple kick. Listen to it. Just a kick. All right, so I don't need that kick in the mix, so I'm muting it, but it's still working just to send the kick signal to the compressors, to activate the compressors. And this channel here is probably here because I was gonna use it and I forgot to delete it, but it's certainly not being used. Anyway, it's just a kick side chain again, so there's nothing much about it. Let's move on to the percussion channel here. What I have here is all Logic loops and Logic's drummer, which is Logic's automatic drummer, let's say drum programming thing, and it works beautifully. I'm a heavy Logic's drummer user. I highly recommend Logic drummer. It works perfectly, beautifully. It's easy to use, it's easy to program, and you have lots of parameters. I'm gonna talk about it later and show you what it's like. And I'm saying this because a lot of people, a lot of Logic users just don't use it. I don't know what's going on. They just don't know it is there, or just don't care. They have other drum libraries, but it sounds beautiful, and I'll keep using it for the longest time. So what I have here first is an African seed shaker. I'm cutting some of the highs here with a dirty tape for the introduction, just the way I did with the other drums. Then I have another shaker. It's actually the same shaker. Now I'm panning it to the right here. And there's nothing going on here in terms of processing. Right after that, for the chorus, which is the busiest part of the track, I have a combination of things, percussive elements. So this is what's going on here. I have this hi-hat topper pattern. It's all chopped up. Everything here is Logic stock sounds. Pan to the left, pan to the right. I have the same shaker I just mentioned. And pan to the left, I have Logic's drummer. So this is what I'm talking about. It's using a Logic instrument, percussion DST. And here are the parameters you have. I'm not gonna touch them because I want to keep it pristine, but you have some presets already, and you can select the element you want and the different patterns that have been already programmed by Logic programmers. Okay, so this is it for the percussion. And in terms of processing, it's very simple for both drums and percussion. I have this channel strip here. It's Lindell 80 by Plugin Alliance, and I'm pretty much using this throughout the whole track. All of my tracks, all of my bus channels have this on, and I'm just using pretty much just the presets they gave us. So lots of good presets here, and what I'll do is I'll just load up a preset and tweak from there. Let me go over this a little bit because it is in every channel here in this track. We're gonna go a little bit in detail here in this channel strip. It's a basic channel strip. It has everything all channel strips have, but I'll just show it for the sake of information. So the first column is a preamp, so I can crank it up and get more saturation. I set the total harmonic distortion to 0. I don't want any excessive saturation here, and I've already played with it and it didn't work out very well. And here we have the filters and EQ, then the compressor and a gate, and this is it. Volume. There's not much to it. And one thing I did was set all the noise to off. I turned off all the noise, and I turned off all the clipping. I don't want any clipping. I don't want any excessive saturation. So this is why I did it. And what it's doing is do the job, like in terms of EQ, in terms of filtering, and in terms of compressing the sound and giving it its flavor. Let's call it flavor for lack of a better word, and which is a Neve inspired flavor, as it's a recreation of a Neve console. So it's in every track. I have it everywhere here. If you see Lindell 80, Lindell 80, Lindell 80. So, oh, this one doesn't have it, but all the others do. So this is what's going on here. Then what I have here is a bus compressor, SSL bus compressor. Hitting very, very lightly. I just want to keep transients under control. And another EQ after everything here for drums. Just cutting some of the low end and some of the top end here. I did this just enough to get the bass to sound good with the drums, especially the kick. Percussion, just the basic drum beat preset here from Lindell, and this is it. So let's check out the guitars now. The guitars play a very important role here in this track, and let's check out the harmonic guitars. They're not exactly playing just chords. They're doing other things there, but they're more involved in the harmony. This is why I call them the bass guitars. So listen up. Okay, so what's going on here? I have a combination of 3 channels, one pan to the left, one pan to the right, and another one in the middle. And I'm combining them so I can have a fuller and bigger sound for the guitars. And what I did was play both parts and record them separately. And actually, I played a third time. So everything here, I played my own with my beautiful Gibson Les Paul here. And what I did was put them all together. And if you listen closely, you're going to see that we're not playing exactly the same thing and those tracks. So they're a little bit different, which adds to the human feel of the whole track. And another thing that I did here that I don't usually do, but it worked well here, was avoid excessive editing for the guitar. Of course, there's some chopping up going on here, but nothing much. I tried to play it as many times as I had to, and to keep it the most I could. So this is what each individual track sounds like for the guitars. The one in the middle, the one on the right, the one in the left, all together. And there's another trick I used here for these guitars. Sending them to different reverbs. And those reverbs are panned to the left and to the right, depending on where the guitar is panned. So the one on the right here, I'm sending to bus 5, which is the reverb that is panned to the left. So I'm inverting them. So if the guitar is on the right, the reverb is on the left. If the guitar is on the left, the reverb is on the right. So this is another trick. I think I learned this one from Warren Hewart. Yeah, Produce Like a Pro. And this is an interesting, very, very interesting trick to make it sound good and wide and huge guitars. So let's check out these other 2 guitar phrases here. So I have some chords here. Oh, it's actually the guitar phrase. And the chords are on the other side. Guitar on the left, reverb on the right. Sounds pretty good. They come back here, the 3 guitars I've already showed you. And that's all for the bass guitars. Let's talk a little bit about the processing of those guitars. So if you take a look at each channel, I only have one plugin. And that one plugin I have for all my guitars here is the Soft Tubes Marshall Silver Jubilee 2555. So this is an amazing amp simulation. And I remember I bought it very cheap. It was one of those sales. I don't remember exactly when. It was probably Black Friday or something. And I had to pick it up. So sounds amazing. Great, great, great amp simulation. I definitely recommend this one. And I decided to use this in every guitar track here. Of course, I'm changing just a little bit of the settings for each instance of the guitar, but it's just the same plugin. I try to keep it simple. I don't like complicated stuff. Now we're moving on to the melody guitars. And the melody guitars are organized into 2 tracks only using the same Marshall plugin. And this is what they're doing. Listen up. So they're actually playing in a harmonic way too, the melody. It's like a vocal and a backing vocal together. What I did was try to create a sort of a dialogue between the guitars. So in this case, they're pretty much playing the same thing, but in different registers of the different parts of the neck of the guitar. But here I start a sort of a conversation, a call and response pattern here with the guitars. Listen, it's pretty interesting. Cool, right? So that was an interesting idea I had after recording all those guitar parts. That didn't really, that whole idea wasn't really born that way. What I did was play the whole track and start noodling on the guitar, just creating stuff and recording them. Then I realized that I had complementary melodic ideas going on and in a whole recording. So I chopped them up and I split them in different channels and I panned them, one to the left, another one to the right. And this is how it all ended up. And I think I got a pretty interesting result here. So this is the guitars. This is the guitar, the melody guitars channel. And what I have here, just the Lindell 80 with the preset called Electric Guitar SSL Native Bus Compressor. So I cut most of the lows here. Anything below 200 hertz is cut off for the bass guitars because they're playing more bassy notes. So for the melody guitars, I didn't do that low end cut because it was playing mostly higher notes and it was not necessary. That kind of low cut technique can be problematic also if you cut too much of too many tracks of too many instruments. You're gonna end up with a very thin, a very weak mix. So you're gonna end up with a track that lacks energy, and you gotta be careful when you're cutting the low end like that. Now we're moving on to the synth, which is a Logic loop. And I pretty much just got the loop here from the Logic stock sounds. So it's called Chime Chord Layers. So Chime Chord Layers 2. I didn't even bother to change the name. So this is it. The original sound. And this is it in my mix. It's a little bit different, but I kept most of it the way it is. What I have here is some RC20 going on with the Wow and Flutter preset and the compressor doing the pumping thing with the sidechain, the kick sidechain, so we can have that movement of pumping. So listen up. It's working pretty heavily here. Doing a lot of gain reduction. I'd like to mention that this particular sound here was my first element in this Logic session. I put it there and I used it as a sort of a sonic canvas where I would paint the whole track on. And I usually do this. This is something I like doing very much because there is a chord progression there. There is a mood there that I can feel. And I just go from there. I build up from there. And it's a pretty interesting approach. Of course, I've already tried lots of different approaches. And for referencing, this is something I always do. So listen to a reference track. And it's exactly the same approach I did when I wrote my reference track. Now let's take a look at the brass. And if you take a look at the number of plugins that I have here all turned on, you're going to see that there's some heavy processing going on here. I must mention that I'm using only Logic's brass VSTs. I'm using no third-party plugin here for the brass instruments, and this is what they sound like. Then I have a couple of brass stabs here. Then I have some small brass phrases here. And a few brass tabs. The brass patterns I have here are very simple, just not complicated, but they actually add a different layer of interesting to the track because they're always coming and going and doing their little thing here and there and acting as ear candy mostly, which is basically what we do to make tracks that are based on a loop like this. It all started with an 8-bar loop. So when we turn those loops into whole tracks, we have to make them interesting throughout the whole thing. So the brass are just a very nice way to do this. And what's going on here in terms of processing? Let's take a look at it. What I have here is a Lindell 80 bus. So it's acting just like a console bus. It's not doing anything other than add some flavor here. Let's call it flavor. So this is what it's doing, some saturation, but very subtle. Then I have my beautiful valve compressor here. Right next to it, I got some EC300. This is a delay plugin, a very nice one. It's very interesting. There are lots of presets for each kind of use you might think of. I definitely recommend that EC300 for the brass to pierce the whole mix and to have that punch to be heard and to cut through the mix. I've usually put some saturation on them. So I'm using this Sound Toys little radiator. Sounds amazing. Great plugin. And I'm using the Plugin Alliance SPL Vitalizer just to breathe some more life into it. Then more saturation here, some tape saturation. This one is called DAW Cassette. It's a very cool plugin too. Then the channel strip. I'm just using the horns preset here. SSL bus compressor. Channel EQ. Since I have a trombone here with a lot of low end, I decided to cut it, to cut everything below 115 hertz here. And a little bit more of saturation here. This is Omega N by Kush Audio, another wonderful saturation plugin. So this is what the brass sounds like. There's another interesting thing here to mention about the brass. Since I decided to create sort of a dialogue approach for the guitars, I tried to do the same thing for the brass. So this is why I have a sort of a conversation between the trombones and the saxophone and trombone and the trumpets. So listen up. Sounds pretty cool. Low and high notes working together. This part. So this is it. And there are lots of things going on here in the trumpet. And Logic has these brass sections already sorted up for us. So I used this one called Sugar Hill. And we have here sax, a tenor sax, a baritone sax, trumpet 1, trumpet 2, trombone 1, trombone 2, So there's a lot of things going on here in one instrument you can find here on the list. So just a stock instrument, 3-piece section, 6-piece section, or the one I picked, 7-piece section. And what you do for these ones is create one single MIDI region, and it will split the notes among all those instruments. It's crazy how it works, but it works just fine for me. And of course, sometimes you have to go there and do some manual tweaking or put different notes for different parts of the section. But sounds good to me. It's working. Now we're going to talk about the bass. And the first thing I'd like to point out is that I split it into two channels. One I call bass low, the other one bass high. And the reason why I did it was because I wanted to have a very clear and precise bass sound, especially because there's a bass solo in this track. And every time we have some saturation or distortion in the bass, we tend to lose some of its low end. So this is why I decided to have two tracks. And what I'm doing here is I'm cutting all the highs from the bass low, the low bass, the part that is more subby, to keep the low end energy of it. And for the other track, I'm doing the exact opposite. So I chose 300 hertz here, and I'm cutting everything below that frequency. And I'm adding some saturation to the high frequencies of the bass so I can get it more crunchy and more precisely delineated in this whole mix. And what I'm doing for the other one, for the low energy of the bass, is basically just leaving it as it is. And I'm sending both tracks to the same auxiliary channel here, and all I have for processing is this Ampeg Classic. I'm just using the regular default setting. I just turned it on, and I didn't even bother to pick a preset. It's just the way it is when you turn it on. And I'm sending it to my channel strip, and I'm using the bass guitar preset here. Nothing fancy at all. So this is what the bass sounds like on its own. And another interesting point is that I tried to keep it as simple as I could, and I played it as many times as I had to in order to get a good recording. And of course, I did some editing, but not that much editing. I wanted to keep that human energy and the imperfections of a human player. And you're going to notice that there's even some noise here in the recording. And it's okay. I just kept the noise, and it adds to the natural and organic sound of the whole track. So listen to it. No, just the high. Now just the subby bass. Okay, so this is the bass, and I'd like to spend some time talking about my bass solo here. And the interesting fact here is that not a lot of stock music or production music in general have bass solos or guitar solos, piano solos. Solos are not really a thing in this kind of music. But I just felt like putting a bass solo there, and I somehow felt that the track needed it. So I decided to create one and keep it there, but I wasn't very comfortable with it. And even my good friend and mentor, Stephen Battle, said, hey, if you had sent me this track for feedback before submitting it to Motion Array, I would have said, hey, just kill that solo, man. But luckily I didn't send this one to him first, because the bass solo, I think, is one of the coolest things here in this track. It's fun and it's bold, right? Nobody does it. It's highly original in this kind of music. And I had to take chances here. I took the risk and I did a bass solo. So this is what it sounds like. Okay, so this is my bass solo, and I wasn't very sure about keeping it in the track, so I decided to sort of make it in a convincing way, and this is what I came up with. I played a little guitar lick during the bass solo, and I put my spoken element here of a guy, the recording, the same recording of the guy from the Columbia Mission saying "beautiful, beautiful" right after the bass solo, actually in the middle of it. So this is what it sounds like in the whole context. That's pretty original. Nobody has bass solos in their tracks, but also pretty risky. So I wanted to make it more convincing by putting a guy saying "beautiful, beautiful." So maybe the emotion array staff would agree with him and keep the track in their catalog. So this is what I have for the bass here. Now we're moving on to the crashes, chimes, and vocal chops. What's important about this is that they are responsible for adding the transitions to the track. As you can see here in the upper part, I have mapped out the arrangement of the track. So I got the intro here, verse plus build up, chorus, breakdown, verse, chorus 2, chorus plus drum break, and outro, and everything is mapped out here. Every time I have a transition between different parts of the arrangement, I make sure to put those elements to work in order to crossfade those transitions and make them sound smooth and fluid to the listener. Let's take a look at it. There's not really a lot going on, so it's mostly this chime sound here. Everything's from Logic. I've never bought a library for that kind of sound or used Splice or anything. Then I have some crash cymbals, some vocal chops, everything from Logic. And you can even check out those names and look them up here. You're going to find them. If you download all Logic sounds, you're going to find them for sure. And what I'm doing is send everything to this bus here. And I created this beautiful track stack, which I find very useful for organization of the whole session. And I'm cutting the low end of it all just to avoid any kind of information here in the low range. And I'm sending everything to Chromaverb, which is a great reverb from Logic that not a lot of people use. One thing I love about it is that I can work on my decay in terms of bars. So I can tell it how many bars I want it to last every time I need to work with it. Of course, I can use the seconds here, but using 1 or 2 or 3 bars is a very easy way to measure it for me. And I'm using the room preset here. So listen to my transitions here. Sounds awful on its own, but in context, it really helps. Some vocal chops here. More vocal chops. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Again, I'm using that tape stop effect. And this is it. this is what I have for the crashes, chimes, and vocal chops. We're getting to the end here, and the last minute element I put in this track was this sway deep wood block. You can find it here. It's called sway deep wood block. So this is what it sounds like. Yeah, somebody would find this very useless, right? So this is a very simple sound. It doesn't really mean anything or add anything that important to any kind of music, but I decided to use this one. I changed it a little bit and I chopped it up a little bit, and I'm playing with my tremolo plugin here, another great Logic stock plugin, and I'm playing with it with the panning of it. And I cut the lows just to make sure there was nothing going on here below 310 hertz. And what I'm doing here is add an ear candy element to the track. So it's barely being heard throughout the track, but there's another interesting element helping make it more interesting throughout the whole thing. So listen to it on its own. And here's what it sounds like in context. It almost sounds like if you have your guitar pick and you're just touching the strings but without playing them, without letting them sound, and it adds another percussive element to the track. The final element is the spoken word, and the spoken word is just something I got from Logic. It's called Welcome Home, and this is one of those recordings, those radio recordings from space missions in the United States that go to public domain, and the developers of Logic decided to bring those sounds into their sound library here and make them available for us Logic users. There are lots of spoken word elements here, and some of them are very cool, others are not so much, but I decided to go with this one, and this is called Welcome Home. Listen to the original recording here.
Welcome home, Columbia. Beautiful, beautiful.
So I chopped it up and I kept the parts I wanted for my track, and this is what it sounds like in the beginning of the track.
Welcome home.
On its own.
Welcome home.
So in terms of processing here, what I'm doing is using some of Arturia's tape Mellify. Yeah, this is the thing. I want it to sound like an old recording, but it's just using a preset, nothing special, and I'm sending it through some Space Designer. I'm using the Tiny Phone preset, and I'm sending it to the Chroma Reverb, again the room preset. So just 30% wet and with a 1 bar decay. It's not so drenched in reverb here. And I'm cutting some of the high end. I want it to sound more like a very old recording. This is what it sounds like again.
Welcome home.
And this is what the other part sounds like during the bass solo.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I thought that if somebody said the bass solo was beautiful, probably everybody would agree with him. And apparently it worked. Okay, so this is my spoken word element. Now we're moving on to the reverbs. I've already talked about the reverbs here before, but I'm just mentioning that I have 4 different reverb auxiliary channels here, and the ones that I'm sending the guitars to are panned to the left and to the right. They're not exactly hard panned. I'm at 45 here, and I have these large hall, concert hall, small room, and I'm sending a couple of elements to them. And this is it for the reverbs. Not a lot going on. I'm just using Logic stock reverbs. There's nothing special, nothing fancy here. Everything just works. I'm gonna talk a little bit about my mastering chain. So you're gonna see that there are lots of plugins loaded up in here, but each one of them is doing just a tiny bit. So the first one I'm using is Tape by Softtube. I just love this plugin. I'm using the Clean Master preset. It adds a little bit of vintage saturation to the whole track. Then I have the Lindo Lady Buzz, barely doing nothing here. It's actually doing nothing here. It's just there for its flavor. Then I have my SSL bus compressor. It's not doing much. Actually, I have it on a pop mix bus preset here, and I actually didn't change anything from there. So the gain reduction here is around 4 decibels. Then I send it all to my 2BQ, which is a Pultec Recreation by Logic. It's a stock plugin. It's a vintage 2BQ. Sounds very good, and it adds another layer of vintage vibe to the whole track. And I'm using the Enhanced Mix preset. Then I send it to my SPL Vitalizer. I'm using the Mastering Session Start preset. Then I'm using Drummer S73. It's a sort of a compressor, and there's some EQ going on here under the hood. Then I'm sending it all to my multipressor. So this is a multi-band compressor by Logic. It's a stock plugin. And what I'm doing here is just keep everything under control. I don't want any lows or mids or highs to go overboard here. So this is why I'm sending this almost at the end of my mastering chain. And right next in my chain, I have Slate Digital's Fresh Air. I'm using it just to excite the high end. So it's an exciter, and I'm using the Mix Bus Polish preset. I know I probably didn't need all of those plugins loaded up here, since I'm sending everything to Ozone, and Ozone is a complete solution. But I think each one of them adds a little bit of character to the whole thing. So this is why I have all of those plugins working there, and I still send them all to Ozone. And what Ozone is doing here is I'm using this Ultra Width. So this is the one I'm using, and it's not selected here because I tweaked it after I dialed it in. So there's a mid-side EQ here, boosting a little bit of the mids and the high end to get it to sound like a wider mix in the stereo image. The imager is turned off. It's usually turned on when you load up the preset, but I turned it off because I thought the EQ was doing a great job here on its own, and I didn't need any imager work in here. Yeah, so the mix is pretty loud already, so it's not doing a lot of limiting here, not a lot of gain reduction. I'm gonna go a little bit deeper in the mastering process here, and I'm gonna show you guys what I usually do to check my mix before sending them out for feedback, and especially before submitting them to any library. What I do is use Logic's multimeter, and this is a very interesting tool where we have an analyzer, a goniometer, and we can check the correlation. We can check LUFS here for loudness, and it's a very cool tool. So I usually play my mix, and I usually have this gain plugin here because I always want to check what it sounds like in mono, because even though we mix in stereo and we have lots of stereo systems out there, sometimes our music's going to be played in mono. So think, for example, of a huge department store, and you have lots of small speakers all spread across the big room. So everybody who's listening is not going to get a real stereo image from that system. And it's got to sound good in mono, right? And so no element must disappear when you're working in mono. My last metering tool here is Span by Voxengo. It's a free plugin, and I'm using here a preset called Stereo Mastery. So I use this to see how balanced my mix is. If lows, mids, and highs are at similar levels, of course, you don't have to go crazy about it. You don't have to have a ridiculously balanced mix, but it helps to make your mixes sound good across different sound systems. Let's see what those things are telling us here. So nothing wrong about the correlation here. It's all in the green area. There's a small valley here around 801K. But it's fairly balanced. And as I said before, you don't have to go crazy about balancing your whole mix in a very perfect way. Of course, you can, but you don't have to. You have to trust your ears to do it, and not so much to look at meters like this. But those meters actually help us train our ears so we can recognize what we're hearing, right, in a better way. And this is what it sounds in mono. Stereo now. You see, it doesn't sound bad in mono. It sounds okay. Everything's there, everything's working, both in mono and in stereo. And this is it. This is what I have for my track, Welcome Home. Thank you so much for watching the breakdown for my track, Welcome Home. And if you found anything interesting, useful, or insightful here about my creative process, please leave a comment down below and don't forget to give it a thumbs up. See you in the next video.